Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Burnt Pancakes podcast. I'm your host, Katie Fensky, and I'm reminding moms that everyone burns their first pancake. Today, I am chatting with Alessandra Wall. She is an executive coach, business owner, and mom of two boys. And we're going to chat all about what it's like being an ambitious woman, an ambitious mom in the midst of motherhood. So, how she built her career while raising her kids, what it's like to be a mom, struggling to find your identity and your ambitions while raising kids. We're talking about maybe not always loving motherhood and some of the mistakes we've made along the way. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Alessandra Wall. Alessandra, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm glad to have you. Your energy already, I can tell we were chit-chatting a little bit. I'm like, you're going to be fun to talk to. Why don't you start off just by introducing yourself and tell us where you are and how many kids you have?
So my name is Alessandra Wall. I am San Diego based right now. I have two kids, both boys, 13 and soon to be 16.
Wow, two teenagers.
When I'm not arguing with them about the fact that I don't want to drive them everywhere and they can totally take public transportation, use their legs
Yes.
or a bike or
Mm-hmm.
find some other parent to drive them around. I have a business where I do executive coaching and have a community to support senior executive women in male-dominated industries.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's get into that. So you've built this business while raising kids. Can you
Yes,
share a bit about that journey, what you do, what inspired you to do that in the midst of motherhood?
sure. So first of all, I started my career as a child psychologist.
Oh,
That
and you
was
made a little
version
shift.
1.0. Then I had my oldest son, Luca, and I didn't want to be a child therapist anymore. And everybody always asks, they're like, well, is it because you saw too many similarities? And that wasn't it. It's because it was so much fun to be on the ground and playing and doing play therapy with children when I could come home and have a lot of time to myself. And it was not quite as much fun when then I would come home and do the same thing at home.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Um, and I was
Yes.
a adult therapist. I worked on anxiety and built a business doing that, but it preceded the birth of Luca. Um, and then there was a point where I just fell out of love with being a therapist. There are a lot of things I discovered becoming a mom. One is that I was an introvert, which I had no idea because I'm super social and I'm high energy,
Interesting.
but I did
Wow.
not realize how much time I actually spent alone and recharging
Mm,
before I had children.
yeah. And then when you have kids, you don't get that time.
Well, you
Or
can't, and it's beautiful,
there's no.
right? There, other than dogs, small children are the only beings that will be quite that excited to have you walk in the door at the end of the night. And it is
Yes.
absolutely wonderful, and it does totally go away because they go from mommy, I love you to what's for dinner, which is the world's worst question.
Yeah.
Um, but I I I realized I just couldn't do it anymore. There were lots of pieces. Like I didn't want to be on a phone call in the middle of the night with the psychiatric emergency room and somebody else when I knew I was going to have to be up at like 5 a.m. because Luca
Yeah.
woke up at 5 a.m. to nurse. Having a second kid just made the problem, compounded the problem. Um, So I decided I'd build a new business because, hey, that was going to solve things. And I ran my therapy business while trying to build first a life coaching business because midlife crisis, um, and then exhausted myself doing that and burnt myself out, and then built this business, which I've loved. And I've been in business 10 years as a coach. I've
Wow.
been retired basically going on 3 years as a therapist.
Okay. I was going to ask when you stopped, when you made the full jump to that. So 2 years?
Yeah, it was my safety blanket, right? It was my
Mhm.
fallback job. So I
Yeah.
had it for a long time, uh, past probably when I needed to have it. And for me, the most interesting thing about being a businesswoman and having children is having children made me incredibly ambitious in a way I was not before having children.
Interesting. Okay. Explain that. Go into that. That's very
So
interesting.
before having children, life was simple. insofar as I dreamed of really mundane things and would get like a kick out of really mundane things. So work was something I did and I enjoyed my work. I actually really loved what I did, but I didn't feel a need to work on my career beyond having my brick and mortar business, like pictured maybe growing the business, getting other therapists. There was something about, I think, feeling limited by parenthood. That moment where you realize, wait, I can't do anything I want to do anymore, that made me realize how much more I wanted to reach for.
Oh, interesting.
And then suddenly I'm like, I don't just want a brick and mortar teeny coaching business. Like, I want an international business. I want to be like the Kleenex of, or the Band-Aid or whatever, like that brand name of coaching for these senior executive women. The ambitions are just big.
How were you able to juggle that all though with kids?
Uh, Poorly. I mean, like everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because I was making money as a therapist and using that money to try to fund starting this business. I had two kids under the age of 5 at the
Wow.
time. I have a husband who has a full-time job. Uh, I had my kids in a co-op preschool, so I had to
Help
dedicate
out
time to
there.
going and
Hmm.
helping out there. So it was one of those things where every minute that I wasn't mothering or wasn't operating as a therapist, I was in my office trying to build this other business. And it
Wow.
was really gratifying in some ways, but I would have to say that around the time my kids were maybe 6 and 3 or 7 and 4, something like that, they're 2.5 years apart. So depending on the time of the year, they're almost
Yes.
3
Yeah.
years or 2 years.
Yeah.
They looked at me and they say, Mommy, you work too much. So then I started taking Saturdays off, meaning I I wouldn't even like no matter what I promised them, I would never open my computer on a Saturday, even if they had a play date and they were doing something, even if they didn't need me, I had to take that time off.
Hmm.
That really helped. Starting to set boundaries really, really helped. The other piece that I had to educate my kids. To me, it was this big thing of this is really important to me. This
Right.
is for me.
Hmm.
And to say I work a lot, which is different than too much.
Right.
My job as a mom is not necessarily to be at your beck and call.
Yep.
You said you have a 5-year-old still, right?
Yep.
You know when they're at that age when they're like,
Hmm.
look at mommy, look at, and they just want you to sit
Yes.
and watch them
Come play
play.
with me. Come do this. I want this. Yes.
Yeah,
Every
and I'm like,
second.
no,
Yeah.
I made a sibling for you
I've
because
told them that so many times.
I didn't want to be your playmate.
You
That's
have
not
a
my job.
brother. There's your, and I look back at childhood and I'm like, I remember playing for hours by myself. Like I had a playhouse and I would just be there. My boys can't do that. It's like, mom, come outside with us. Come do that. I'm like, why can't you just go play? Yeah.
Well, part of it is that we do it for that. Like, this is one of the big things I argued when I was a child psychologist still. I pulled my kid out of one of his neighborhood schools because there wasn't enough play. And a lot of the play was directed and scripted. I'm like, that
Right.
is not good for the child's brain.
Right.
The kid needs to be bored. Half of
Mm-hmm.
what recess should be is them trying to figure out what game they're going to play and figure out the social politics of who's going to do what. And then the recess bell goes out. Nobody's ever played the game, right?
Right.
So I would look at my kids and go, and like even today, sometimes they're like, I'm so bored. I'm like, yeah, that's how you know I
Yeah.
love you. I'm gonna let you be bored.
Yes. And they get so mad at me when I say that, but I'm like, the most creative things come out of boredom. So be bored. Yeah. Yeah. And I also have a ton of work to get done. So because do you work mostly from home? So like when they're home, you're like working, right?
Well, so this office that you see
Hmm.
is built out of my garage. In our last place, we had an even better one where there was actually a bathroom there. This is literally, I have to go back into the house, but I did. When I was a therapist, I had an external office. Then the pandemic hit, and we were
Oh,
doing those things online.
yes.
Then for a few years, I got an external office in downtown San Diego, but it was really expensive. And the only benefit was that it allowed me to end my days, to be more disciplined about when to
Yeah.
end my days. Then I
Yeah.
realized I can do that on my own
Yeah.
here. So
Yeah.
they know that when I'm in this room,
I'm working.
They have to pay attention. Am I looking at the screen? Am I talking to the screen? But sometimes I will see movement, right,
Or like a
peripherally,
note, they write a
right?
note and stick it on the, can I
And
have that?
and they text now, right? So that what's for
Oh,
dinner sometimes comes as a text. I'm like, don't even dare ask that
don't
question.
ask me that.
When they call me, they're like, hey, I gotta go. I'm like, you better not be asking me what's for dinner because it's
Too
not
important.
takeout.
This is too
So you're not
important.
gonna be happy anyhow.
Yes, right?
And I don't see why it should be my responsibility to think about what's for dinner. You're
Yeah,
16 and 13 now.
yeah.
You make me dinner.
I told my son that the other day. I'm like, if what I'm making is so awful, then you can be in charge of dinner tomorrow. And he
And
thought
it
that
has
was
to be
so cool.
balanced. Do you tell them
Yeah,
that?
right,
So I'm like,
right.
you have to be in charge, but it has to be healthy and balanced.
Yeah, you can't just microwave it.
Right. You can't just make a bunch of rice and put soy
Right.
sauce in it. That's
Oh
not going to
my
work
gosh.
for me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I feel the same way because I taught for a very long time. I was a classroom teacher and then I did independent study. But when I was doing the independent study, all of my work was at home, pretty much, other
Mhm.
than like going out and doing some meetings. Now everything's like, I am messaging clients on my phone. I'm answering emails on my phone. I'm in here recording. And my son said to me the other day, you're on your phone too much. And I was like, well, yeah, I do scroll a lot. But I'm like, at the moment, I'm like, I am replying to a client who paid me money to help them. Like I'm a potty trainer. So explaining to him like yes I am on my phone a lot but it's work whereas like dad goes off to work and so they see that they don't know like when I'm home I'm still working
Mhm.
so that was kind of an adjustment for me to have
Yeah.
to like
I
separate work and home and
I was born in Iran.
oh
My
okay.
dad at the time had an office in the house, but it must have been like I don't we left when I was 10 months, so I don't remember anything about it. But it was a big enough basement space that his secretary had her desk and he had a private office. And my mom was always really surprised that my father would let my brother and sister disturb him. And he would say, Elizabeth, here's the thing. If I give them 5 minutes of undivided attention, I save myself an hour to an hour and a half
uh,
from being interrupted.
right.
So I do try to do that. If I'm not in the call and they walk in at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the school day, I will physically turn myself away from my computer and look at them in the face, or turn my oldest will come and sit in there and like ask me about dinner. Yeah, theme. Or tell me about his day, and I'll tell them, I'll pay attention to them for 5 minutes, and after five
Yeah,
minutes I'll tell them it's still the middle of my workday. It's like 3:30.
right,
Like
right.
it's 3:30 on a Tuesday. It's the
And
middle of
you
my
have
workday.
homework, go do your homework.
You do they? I don't think they have homework these days. I mean, the high
Mine-
schooler does,
oh I would
but
love it if mine had less that would be nice.
um, but I find that that helps a little bit. And
Right.
but I'm not working with people on potty training, right? That's an in the moment thing.
Yeah. But they could pause a little bit. I just wanted him to know, like, I am not just completely ignoring you. You know, I'm helping someone. But what is good for them to see, I think, because we both have boys, it's, I think, good for them to see mom creating a career. You know, like
Yes.
when I was teaching, they saw me go off to work, you know, like I would leave them with my mom but this is like mom's doing something to better our lives. So talking about ambitious women, like you work with some very ambitious women, like that's a good thing for their kids to see.
Yep. And we're still like we're still behind societally. We even I look at my husband sometimes, his reaction, and I ask him, I'm like, I wonder if your mom said that to your dad when he would go travel for work in, the 80s and the 90s. I'm like, I'm pretty sure she just it was understood. It was understood that your dad was going to travel. It was going to, and so it's re-educating spouses and partners, but also the kids that this is what it looks like to build a business. And what I
Hmm.
found, I don't know if you've seen this yet, I bet you will if you haven't, is that the boys are actually really proud of it,
Oh,
right? Like they actually, oh, what is it? She has her own business.
right.
She does
Right.
this.
Well, they were asking me the other day, how many subscribers do you have on your YouTube channel? You know, once you get 10,000, you get the play button. I'm like, okay, well, I'm working on it. Yeah, they're very into it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the obstacles moms face when trying to pursue their personal and professional careers. Like, how do we overcome some of those obstacles?
Well, the one that always the people always mention, even you and I have talked about it, is time, right?
Oh,
So I think that's a big
that was
one.
the one that came to my mind. Yeah.
And with that, I would tell any mom who's doing this exactly what I told, like what I tell the women I work with, and what I did is you have to be really clear about what it is you want to achieve and what the most important pieces of it are. I sunk so much time. You and I talked before the call about how I used to have a podcast. The hours I sunk not into doing the podcast, but I would create an individual post summary for the podcast. And then
Uh-huh.
I'd create sound bites. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the business I was trying to build, that was actually not necessary. So getting really crystal clear. The other thing I would recommend, especially if somebody's building a business, is treat your time like you would a corporate job.
Oh,
I start my day at 8:30. It ends at
okay.
4:30. I 90% of the time exit at 4:30, right? Like I don't see I don't take calls until 10 a.m. because I need to give myself in general, right? Like group calls. Group calls are the one thing. Once a month we have group calls earlier, but I need to give myself that focus period most days where I can get work done uninterrupted. If I try
Mm-hmm.
to do that in the afternoon, again, kids come back from school depending on the day, half day, full day, whatever. It's really being treating your time like you would a corporate job and getting your schedule ready is one thing. I think the other big challenge, at least I ran into as a mom, is well, there are two that I'm coming up with, but this is as a like is not feeling guilty for being really ambitious and
Mm.
for actually enjoying work. I have a husband who's working to retire. That's his goal. Like if we win the lottery tomorrow, he retires.
You would
If we win the
retire.
lottery tomorrow, I grow my business. Right? Like
Right.
I love what I do. That's part of the reason why I invested all that time in building this business is so that I didn't just have something that paid the bills. I had something that paid the bills that I
Mm.
genuinely love. I don't love all pieces of it, but I
Right.
love most of it most of the time. So
Right.
I grow.
You seem
And
passionate about it. Yeah.
I love the women I work with, and it's
Mm-hmm.
taken time to get to that place. You know, when you first start a business, it's like you've got a pulse, you've got a checkbook. I can solve your problem. Let's work together. I'm past that. I get to
Mm.
choose who I work with. I get to say no to people, not because I can't help them, but because it's like
Not the right fit.
the kismet is just it's like slightly off.
Okay.
And it's really sometimes hard. I think as women and as moms to not be made to feel guilty because you have a lot of professional ambition. Like
Right.
that was a big one. And it goes back to what you and I were talking about. I use it to educate my kids all the time, and they are genuinely proud. Um,
Mm.
and I teach them a different model. And there is their father's a physician, so there's certainly the model of go to school, do this, get the degree, become a physician. Although with AI, I'm not encouraging my kids to go into becoming a physician.
Oh, wow.
Um, or there's this other model. There are these other ways of doing things and teaching them that you can actually love your job and invest time, not because you're under the thumb of the man who's trying to get you to work and like there's this corporate overlord who's burning you out, but
Got to do it till I
because
retire. Got to keep
yeah,
going.
because
Yeah.
you there's value in doing work that speaks to you. And then the third thing I've seen, and this is for whether you're building your own business or whether you work in the corporate world, the I talk often about how important it is to have a really strong professional social network. The first version of my business, the one that was failing, the coaching business, part of it is because I thought I could just hang my shingle, Dr. Wall, you know, PhD, human expert, and that was going to be enough. I could do that. I could have Instagram posts and a
Hmm.
podcast, and I could create programs and have it on a website, and that I would get business that way. I failed. Like my highest grossing year was $20,000 gross. Like,
From what you were making before, you were like, this isn't going to work.
well, and I burnt myself out. When I
Hmm.
came back to the game, what I discovered is actually you need to meet people. And as a
Mm.
therapist, you don't meet people, like all the people you work with are not people you can build secondary work relationships with.
Okay.
There are rules around that. So in order to build my business, my brand, and now to grow business, have to spend a fair amount of time going to events where they're the kind of women I want to work with or their bosses. I constantly speak to corporate women. I certainly experience this, who say they feel like they have to make up for every minute that they spend away.
Wow.
So you go to an event at night, you're networking, but you know that when you come home, like before you go, you have to make sure the dinner's ready for everybody, everybody's set up.
Mhm.
Maybe you're going to offer to do an extra driving of one kid to one sport to make up for the fact that you weren't there, in a way that I still think today in heterosexual relationships, I don't think men feel that way. I don't think men who have to go to networking events or travel for business go, because I've been traveling, I need to make sure that when I come home, I pick up all the child carpooling duties for the next week to offset it. I had a client who was flying back from Japan for work. She's the primary breadwinner for her family. And her husband called her when he saw that her plane landed.
She's like, I
Said,
can't.
"Hey, do you mind stopping by the store and getting some bread for the kids' sandwiches for school?" And they have like whatever, a corner market like within walking distance of the house. And she did. Jet lagged, coming back from however many hours, 16 hours in an airplane, whatever. She stopped by the store, she grabbed the sandwich bread, she made the sandwiches. Like, that to me is this huge challenge for most women, because it makes doing the things we need to build our corporate careers or our businesses so much more exhausting than they would normally even just be to
Mhm.
travel for business or to go to evening networking events.
You still have that other
Mhm.
half of you that you can't can't hand off.
And
Was
I
it
thought it
hard?
was
Oh,
just me, but every time I go to events, and I just mention it, no joke, everybody there who's a parent, the moms,
hmm.
you see this like look of, oh, thank you for saying this out loud. Yes.
Right.
Right.
Because we've got to do both. We still have to do both. Was it hard for you? Because you said like networking was very important. As an
Mhm.
introvert, was that something that you had to like come out of your like make yourself do?
Yeah. Yeah. So you, again, I'm super social, love people. You put me one on one in a room with somebody, I do fine. I was totally that kid who, when you saw the new kid come to school, I'd go walk and see them
Hmm.
and make sure they were okay and introduce them to my peer group and whatever. You put me in a room with 50 strangers, and I'm gonna be by the food or by the bar.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know how to introduce myself, right? That's the other thing. You walk into this room, people are like, "Oh, what brings you here?" And I'd be trying to build a coaching business, but I started introducing myself as a therapist when it's
Mm,
not at all what I wanted to do. Uh, Initially, I would try to sell really hard, so it's like you're giving your resume to somebody and trying to convince them. So it was definitely a skill, and once I developed it for myself, I realized it's something I work on a lot with my clients, actually.
that would be a good skill
Mhm,
to practice. Okay, let's switch and talk a little bit about loving being a mom and loving being in parenthood. So you
mhm.
kind of talked a little bit about that, the distinction between loving being a mom and loving parenthood. Tell me a little bit about that.
There was a moment, let me think. So it was in the thick of trying to build version 1.0 of my coaching business. Luca must have been 5, 6. Reese, my youngest, was probably still a toddler. And I was miserable as a parent, right? I did not like parenthood. I did not like the limitations it placed on me. I didn't like the stereotypical role assignments. Uh, Again, like I I guess I didn't give this context. I was very much a good girl growing up. I was the responsible one, so I did everything
Mhm.
responsibly, everything in the order you're supposed to. And it's only once I got kids that I'm like, wait, I was in graduate school when my friends were starting to make money and traveling for fun. I didn't do all that traveling for fun, right? And then I was in a postdoc, and pennies, right? You're like super cheap labor. So I couldn't, like all these things that people had done, like I just went from one responsibility to the next. And I was so lucky because I think you asked me in our questions as we were talking in advance, how did I figure out this distinction? I went to a work event up in Seattle and spoke to a mom who was a physician and she had her a private business. And she's the first one who made that distinction. Hated being a parent. She's like, I hate everything about this, the responsibility, the being tied down. But she's like, I love my son and I love being his mom.
Yeah.
And I think she felt it more acutely than I did. But at the time, it was this really, in terms of not feeling guilty, it was a really nice distinction. I'm like, I loved being a mom. I loved taking my kids to the park in the middle of the day, like hanging upside down with them. That's about the time of my life where I stopped wearing skirts and dresses as much, especially with boys, because I was constantly
Right.
climbing,
Running after
running,
them.
hanging upside down on things. I loved cuddling with them so much. I still, like, when I see parents with new babies, I
Oh, I
know if you're
know.
listening to this and you're a new mom, that it might feel like you're trapped under your infant lying on your belly. It's like the best thing in the world. You will
Hmm.
miss that forced pause where you're like, I can't move, they fell asleep.
Right. Right.
Um, I loved all of those parts of parenthood, so being a mom, but I really didn't enjoy being a parent because I felt tied down by it.
Right. I felt like that there was a huge shift when I had my first son. You go from like, I have all the freedom in the world
Mhm.
to I can't leave the house because I have to feed you in 45 minutes. I remember
Yeah.
my husband used to always, like on a Friday night, he would like pick me up on the way home from work. We'd go and grab dinner and then, you know, hang out, do whatever. We had my son. And one night he called me. He's like, "Hey, I'll just pick up dinner on the way home." And I started bawling because
Yeah.
I was like, "I can't go with you because it's too much work to take this like little newborn." But that was that moment of like, our life is so different right now. Fast forward 10 years and it's like, in hindsight, like it was just a phase,
Right.
we have freedom now. But I just felt this like, I'm not the same person anymore. And I've lost all that freedom. And I wanted this. I wanted to be a mom and I love my kids, but it was a big adjustment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it becomes, especially in the early phases, it suddenly defines you. All your friends who aren't having kids, in case you were wondering, like they don't like hanging out with you as much. It's not personal, it's that you're boring. Your
Yep.
whole energy is focused on this human being, whether they're 6 months or 6 years old. You're
Mm-hmm.
constantly distracted because you're talking to your friend, but you're making sure they're not killing
Uh,
themselves with
yep.
somebody else.
Yep.
And then they,
Interrupted every 5 seconds. Yep.
right, look at mommy. And
Yeah.
um then because you're spending so much time taking care of this kid, like you have no idea what's really happening in the world. You have nothing interesting to talk
Hmm.
about. And there's this massive disconnect. So I think part of it is in the early phases, probably up until the age of 5,
Yep.
it's so all encompassing. And when I used to, after I got through my kids, I would tell women who were wondering about having children, I'd say 5 years. That's all you need to know. Having children will slow your career down by 5 years. It won't stop it, it won't stall it, but it'll slow it down five
Hmm.
years after the birth of your youngest kid. So if you have kids in a row, for me, it was, 7.5 years. Once they start going to school, with regular, like none of this half day stuff, like full
Right.
days of
Right.
school,
Full day
you
school.
start regaining some momentum, but it's still not entirely the same thing because you have to be present in the evening, you have to be
Hmm.
present for things, you have to be present if they're sick. It gets easier. And you're right, it is all phases. There's so
Hmm.
many pieces of those ages that I miss.
Yeah.
And then there's some really cool, like, there are really cool parts of having teenage boys.
Yeah. I'm actually not like dreading it. I mean, I'm a little worried because mine are a little challenging, but it also I am in that stage of my youngest just started full day school.
Mhm.
So starting in September, I felt that freedom come back a little bit. Like I can get work done. I can come home from dropping them off and sit at my computer and, do my emails. And I've been working on a digital course that I'm finally, 2 years I've been wanting to do it. And this September was like, I'm going to do it now. And I'm like in my beta testing right now. So just that
Congratulations.
feeling of like, I have me back a little bit.
Yeah.
At 2 o'clock, I go pick them up, and then it's like, it's all over. But that's a different feeling to know once they turn 5, you can kind of find yourself a little bit again.
It's really interesting to me how much shame women experience and guilt they experience around normal reactions to their
Mhm.
children. And I saw this both as a child psychologist, and then later on I would work with mothers who were going through postpartum depression. I am one of those people, I joke, I don't have any skeletons in the closet. And it's not that I don't have skeletons, it's just that they're ambling around, right? They're just out. So I was always very open about the things that other people didn't talk about, partially because I refuse to feel shame for them. So I'm like, I'm just going to put it out there.
Mhm.
Have, you don't need to answer if you don't want to, but it's like, have you ever wanted to shake your baby? Hell yes. There were so
Mhm.
many moments when the kids were small, and I thought, how do teenage moms do this? How do they have the emotional control not to hurt their children? There have been more than one time where I've had to sit outside of the room bawling my eyes out because I just want you to stop crying,
Yes. Yep.
right? Because I'm just so
And then how
tired.
guilty I used to feel about. I remember leaving my son in the bedroom one day to cry. And now I'm like, that was probably the healthiest thing I should have done for myself is just get away for a minute and then regroup. You're okay. He was fine. But I remember feeling like I'm the worst mom in the world. I cannot believe I can't handle his crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at older ages, it's, I don't
Oh,
need
they're
to tell
still
you
throwing temper
everywhere, right?
tantrums. Oh
Like,
my
or I'm
gosh.
just like,
Yeah.
my kids, my oldest will, because they're in so many sports, and I didn't want to put them in so many sports, nor did my husband. They just so happen to get into, and they're really into it, and they can manage their grades and have a
Hmm.
social life at the same time. But I look at them, I'm like, my job is, I am not an Uber. My job is not to drive you all around. And Luca, especially the oldest, will say things like, everybody else's parents do it. And I'm like, good, get everybody else's parents to drive you. Like, that's not going to work on me.
Hmm.
I'm still very much, and I tried to raise my kids like it was the 90s. I, even when Luca was really small, I went and I walked to all my neighbors because this is around the time where you'd hear about parents having CPS called on them for their kids walking to school alone. I'm like, are you
Yes.
kidding me? Like, I walked to
Yes.
school alone at age 7. One kid would come, he'd ring your doorbell, you'd walk with him, you'd go to the next house, ring that kid's doorbell, you all walk to school, you'd come back, there'd be nobody
Fine.
home, and you'd figure it out,
Yes.
right? You would, summer vacations, the parents weren't around, they were working, so I didn't even have a microwave until I was a teenager, so you'd figure out how to use the stove because you had to eat.
Yeah.
Nobody was buying food. I grew up in France, especially by that point in time. Like, restaurants were something you did that was special. And
Hmm.
there was one McDonald's in Paris at the time and one Burger King, and I lived outside of Paris, so I would have had to take the train to get to a fast
Oh
food
my
place.
gosh. Oh my gosh.
But there is so much guilt, right? That it's still like this expectation that we're supposed to be playmates to our kids, and we're supposed to like be teachers still. And I think a lot of us are not cut out to be teachers. And my heart goes out to every educator in this space because they have no authority to educate properly anymore. So uh, if any of my kids' teachers are listening, I love you. Thank you so, so much. I would not want to
Right.
do
They
it.
have so much on their plates right now. So
Um,
much.
to be a sports mom, to be super patient, to have a career, but not too much of a career. I just had to say it out loud, right? Like, I'll tell my kids sometimes, I love you, I don't like you right now. You need to like get out of my face.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
Dr. Wall, the psychologist, says that's super healthy.
Okay. You said it's okay because I have personally, like, I just need you not around me right now. Like, my one was like starting to hit. He got mad. He's like, well, I'm gonna punch you. And I'm like, then don't be in the room with me because I don't want that. That doesn't make me feel good. So don't do that.
My youngest has ADH, maybe with a D sometime, like
Hmm.
the idea of it being really uh, compromising his functioning isn't necessarily there, but when he gets really worked up, it's like he'll have that thing where he struggles to take himself down. And he's been like this
Mm.
since he was an infant. Like, whereas Luca, I could put in a timeout and he would soothe, he would self-soothe.
Okay.
Reese would just sit there and scream, "Help me, help me, help me, help me." And I would look at him, I go, "I'll do breathing with you. I'll do whatever, but you need to get yourself pulled together. Like I can't be the person who fixes you for you because that doesn't like again, Dr. Wall says that doesn't work, right? You if your
Hmm.
kids don't learn how to do this on their own, they will always rely on external sources to soothe. That's problematic. But we had an argument 2 weeks ago over my standards for cleaning the kitchen, which he thought were ridiculous. And I'm
Oh
like,
my
there's no
gosh. Yes.
standards. And
Yes.
he lost it. And he lost it. Like he was bawling, and then it was everything but the kitchen sink, right? He started talking about all the other things he's unhappy about in his life. And I just stopped him. I said, I'm not having this conversation with you right now. I said, I'm not that I'm not willing to have this conversation. I cannot
Hmm.
have it with you when you're in this state. I said, you can be angry at me. I'm fine with that. You cannot be disrespectful. You cannot talk to me on that tone.
Yes.
And I'm like, you're not even addressing the issue that started all of this. So I'm going to go downstairs and do a puzzle. When you feel ready to have a conversation with me about how angry you are with me properly, I'll have it. And he was so mad, but I left him bawling his eyes out on the floor in the kitchen in a corner. And about 20 minutes later, he came down. He's like, I'm ready to have the conversation with you. And then I stopped. Like, we
Wow.
sat on the ground. I gave him a hug. We talked about all of it. But there are like, there are these things that are so difficult to do as parents. You have to have so much energy just to not. I mean, I was having a good day that day because I didn't yell at my
Hmm.
kid about like pulling himself together.
Yeah. And how much like they can trigger you. Like I'm human too. And just hearing this constant like screaming, I'm like, that triggers me. It it's a lot. Yeah. Okay, so talking about parenthood, let's hear about some of your burnt pancake moments. So, I mean, my message is we're all figuring this out together. We all make mistakes. Can you tell us any stories or moments of imperfections that
I
you've learned
mean,
from?
beyond the ones where they're really small and you're nursing them and you fall asleep and they fall and they bonk their head on the ground. Um,
We've all been there. We've all been there.
totally done that. Beyond the when they're really small, having to go sit outside. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I've had moments where I'm a perimenopausal woman now. Like I'm 47, but this thing kicked in at 44.
Mhm. Oh,
So my
I'm about
patience
to
is
turn
like,
44. Yep, I'm
it
already.
kicked in early, so just so you know. But I'm like, my patience is very different. Oh God, I've made so many mistakes with my kids. Which ones? Um, I mean, they're plenty. Like, okay, so there's silly ones that I was thinking. My whole thing about not driving, I have some regrets about that now because there's schools that I was like, I'm not driving to that school all the time. I'm not dealing with that. And now in hindsight, I'm like, damn it, I really should have driven them to that French immersion school because now I have French kids who can't speak French.
Oh,
Um, I'll tell you, my biggest burnt pancake moments with my children really center around being so tired and just yelling back at them,
mm, yep.
right? Um, I I don't believe that all conflict needs to happen in this voice. It just can't. It's not natural, it's not normal, and it's not a good model for most people.
Thank you for saying that because that whole
Most people
gentle parenting thing is like,
most people who talk
that's
like that all the time
torture.
actually aren't having the conversations they need to have. And conflict is really important. And I'll tell you, as a psychologist, when we would see adults who were massively conflict avoidant to a point where it was problematic, they usually fell into one of two categories. One, they had a super explosive household where there was constant yelling, constant anger, and they never saw resolution of fights. The other one were these kids who were in these households where they're like, oh no, my parents never fought. They never argued. So they never got to see
What that,
what it looks like
how
to
to
have an
resolve that.
argument,
Mm,
resolve the argument. And so when people raise their voice or yell, for them, it's super catastrophic because they've never seen
yeah.
it. And so as adults, they did it. But I would say there are times where I will lose my patience and I know it's not a choice. It's the equivalent of when my mom used to spank me, and she was spanking me because she was frustrated, not because she was trying to teach me something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, I remember one day when the kids were small, they weren't listening to me. And I was at the bottom of the stairs, they were at the top of the stairs, and I'm like, I'm gonna yell now in my head. I'm gonna yell. But I was very calm at the time, and I used the biggest voice I could, which wasn't shrill, and it scared them so much they both jumped and then started crying. And I wasn't upset at myself then because I'm like, that was a very calm choice. I'm like, they're not, I've asked nicely, I've asked firmly, I've given, nobody's listening. I'm not going to walk up
Mm-hmm.
there and yank them. I'm going to choose to use this voice versus, uh, and I have so much empathy for my mom now, but that I'm at the end of my rope and I'm yelling at you now. We're perseverating on this point, not because I'm trying to do something for you, but because I'm just so fed up. I need this release.
Mm. I feel like I've gotten that point a lot. Like I just need, and I don't stop. Like I can't stop lecturing. And I'm sure my
Yeah.
son's just like, okay, yeah, you're just like repeating yourself. But I'm like, I just need to get my point across that I don't want you talking back. And yeah.
I tell them that now. So when I'm in a good day and I'm having one of those moments, I'll say, I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm so mad. You just need to sit there and I need to like repeat the same point in seven different ways. Because I'll recognize like the way it feels in my
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
That's a good day. On a bad day, I'm caught in that loop and I can't even articulate to them that I realize I'm repeating myself and it's unreasonable, but I expect them to
Mm-hmm.
listen to it because they're part of the reason I'm feeling the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Can I give a counter to something, like an
Yeah.
anti-burnt
Yeah.
pancake moment? There are times where my children will do things that will drive me nuts, like every time they argue about not leaving on time because one is super focused on getting places early and the other one dilly-dallies
Oh,
and the
God. That's a
craziest
great pair.
things. And I will get mad, right? Because no matter what I do, one of them is angry with me. If I side with the one, if I'm like, we're not
Mm-hmm.
late, we're okay, the one who wants to be ultra punctual is like, you always side with him, blah, blah, blah. And if I side with the one who's being unreasonably punctual, the other one's like, we don't need to leave now. I don't know why you're helping him. Now I've started telling them when I get mad, I talk to them about the unfairness of it to them. I'm like, this is not what you just did to me is not fair. So my cortisol levels are high. My adrenaline is high. I am upset at this point in time. You just got to a place where I am starting my morning. And instead of having a good morning, I
Mm-hmm.
have to be in this state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I'm triggering anything for anybody with that
No,
voice,
it's,
but that is
I
usually
told
the
you
state
five
that I'm
times
in.
to put your shoes on. Like, why can't we have a calm morning?
And I really like actually getting to a point where I'm teaching them that they need to be cognizant of how their dynamics and interactions impact other people. That it's not just, well, those are your feelings, that's up to you, right? It's like, no, no, you create a dynamic pattern. I agree. Like, there are things I could do better to not get caught up in this, like saying,
Mm-hmm.
just do what I say, or you can walk to school. I don't really care. It's 2 miles. You can make it. You'll be late. The tardy will be on you, not on me. And you can go to Saturday school to make it up, which is where I would ideally like to get. But at least to start teaching them to take ownership for the impact that they're having on other people,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
And how
doesn't mean
one feels versus the other. Yeah. That's awesome. Oh, so many good insights here. Um, if we wanted to find you and learn more about you, where could we look?
there are two places. One is our website, which is noteworthyinc.co or .com. I actually own both domains now. Um, and there's a ton of information and there are free resources on there and it talks about what we do. So that's a great place. If you want up to date musings on what's going on in my head, LinkedIn is pretty good.
Okay.
And then with your permission, I will share log on like a sign up for my newsletter
Perfect.
because I write two. I write one weekly, which is called Monday Mindset Resets, where usually I'll think of what I need that day or like things that have come up and I'll just write an email about like a mindset shift and the context for the mindset shift and invite people to take an action differently. And then every 2 weeks, I'll send a longer one on Thursdays as well, which usually delves into some issue like in more depth with more context. I love writing. I actually really love
Oh,
writing
that's
for
awesome.
newsletters.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to include all of those in the show notes. So I'll get those from you and have links for all of those. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting.
It was really nice to talk about being a mom and to talk about being a mom with somebody who gets it.
Yeah. I felt so many times where I'm like, yes, yes, that was me the other day. Yes, that was me. And that is okay. That's normal.
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
is, right? It makes them resilient.
Absolutely. So good. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Alessandra. I know I felt inspired by how she was able to grow her business and also just felt like I could just relate to all the stories she shared about motherhood. So, if you enjoyed it as much as I did, I would love it if you left me a 5-star review, subscribe to my YouTube channel, did all the things to support the podcast so we can keep it growing and get ready for next week's conversation. So, until next week, I do want to remind you that everyone burns their first pancake, so just keep flipping.